Karen wasn't one to let things go. By midday, emails were already flooding Dylan's inbox, copies of alleged policy violations, all neatly time-stamped and CC'd to the board. One accused him of obstructing the fire escape access with unauthorized furniture. Another claimed the rooftop plants were potentially invasive species, and yet another boldly declared his pool was a nuisance water hazard. The pettiness was obvious. Dylan wasn't surprised. He chuckled under his breath as he sipped coffee on his balcony, overlooking the street below. Karen stood near the community bulletin board, practically vibrating with fury as she slapped up a new HOA notice. She didn't know he was watching. The phone buzzed. It was from Milo, his contractor and longtime friend. "Just got off a call with the city inspector," Milo said. "Someone tried to flag the rooftop structure as unpermitted." "Let me guess," Dylan replied dryly. "Blonde hates rules. Walks like her heels are part of her DNA. But would be the one. Don't worry, we're clean. Fully certified and stamped in triplicate." Dylan smiled. "Let her keep playing. She thinks she's winning." That evening he descended to the lobby, passing a cluster of residents whispering near the elevator. As soon as they saw him, the whispers stopped. A man nodded politely. A woman smiled awkwardly. The tension was palpable. Karen was poisoning the well, and he knew it. Still, he remained quiet. It wasn't time yet, not until he had all the pieces in place. 2 days later, the board sent an official summons for a private hearing, one final opportunity to resolve the matter before fines and litigation would begin. Dylan showed up early, dressed in a tailored navy suit, and brought 2 large binders under his arm. Karen strutted in with 3 board members trailing her like nervous interns. She looked smug, confident. The room was silent except for the buzz of the cheap ceiling fan overhead. "We'll keep this simple," Karen began, motioning toward the table. "Either the pool is removed, or the HOA will proceed with legal enforcement. You've had your fun, but this is a shared community, and we won't tolerate special treatment." Dylan opened the first binder. Page after page, signed documents proved full compliance with local ordinances and architectural standards. The board members flipped through in stunned silence. He opened the second binder. "What's that?" Karen asked, annoyed. Dylan said, "See, this building is a funny little structure. When the developer ran out of funding 8 years ago, the ownership was split. A holding company, Midpoint Development Partners, picked up 51% of the project. You may have heard of them." Karen blinked. "No." He slid a document across the table with a knowing grin. "Well, I happen to own that company, which means I'm not just a resident. I'm the landlord. The HOA doesn't get to enforce anything on areas outside of their governing control. And I legally own the building's top floors, rooftop, and underlying lot." For a moment, no one spoke. Karen's pen trembled slightly between her fingers. Her face had drained of color. "You're bluffing," she said at last, though her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Dylan stood slowly, collecting his papers. "I have let the HOA run things out of courtesy. But if you're going to declare war over a swimming pool, I can just as easily dissolve the board entirely." Karen rose, desperate now. "You can't." "Just I can," Dylan said, calm as glass. "And if I decide to, your name will be the first removed from the resident directory. Think about that before you drop off another violation notice." He left the room as Karen sputtered behind him, the other board members staring at her with dawning horror. In the elevator, Dylan leaned against the mirror, watching the floor numbers tick up. His reflection smiled back at him. The game had only begun. The next morning, Dylan opened his door to find a familiar white envelope tucked under the welcome mat. Another violation. This one claimed he had installed non-regulation outdoor lighting that created a disturbance for other residents. He chuckled. The lights in question were soft LED strips barely brighter than candlelight, chosen specifically to comply with city code. Downstairs, he noticed something strange. Every resident he passed either looked away quickly or gave him nervous half-smiles. A few whispered after he passed. The unease in the air was thicker than the summer humidity. Karen was working faster than he thought. By the afternoon, the building's digital bulletin board had been updated with a glaring announcement. HOA emergency meeting. Potential hazard on rooftop, safety priority. Below it, Karen had included anonymous resident concerns, claiming the rooftop pool had caused water to leak into the floor below, despite zero evidence. When Dylan arrived at the mailroom later that day, he found 2 packages labeled returned, 2 senders sitting beside his nameplate. His mail privileges had been suspended. No explanation. He narrowed his eyes. They were playing dirty now. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Hey Milo, you remember that backup generator we installed 3 years ago under the rooftop panels?" "Sure do," Milo replied. "Solar teen with emergency battery? What about it?" "I think it's time we test the override. Kill power to the rooftop security cameras for 48 hours. And also, make sure the auto locks on the elevator are accidentally disabled tonight." Milo laughed. "You want plausible deniability." "Always," Dylan said with a smirk. "But I'm not doing anything. I just want to see how far they're willing to go." By midnight, the building slept. Dylan watched from his penthouse balcony as Karen crept out of the elevator wearing black gym clothes and rubber-soled shoes. She glanced around, clutching a flashlight and a clipboard, and made her way toward the rooftop gate. Dylan followed quietly, barefoot keeping to the shadows of the stairwell. When he reached the door, he cracked it just enough to see her stepping around the pool's edge. Crouching, inspecting tiles, tugging on pipes, she took pictures, stuck post-it notes on the filtration system, and even opened the pump cabinet. She was trying to find anything to bring him down. Suddenly, she lost balance. Her heels slipped on the slick tile, and she tumbled sideways, nearly crashing into the water. Dylan darted forward and caught her arm before she hit the edge. She gasped, startled and breathless, completely exposed. "You know," he said, still holding her steady. "For someone so terrified of this pool, you sure spend a lot of time sneaking up here." Karen yanked her arm free, stumbling back, trying to regain composure. "This isn't what it looks like. It looks like criminal trespass," Dylan said flatly. "Tampering with private property. Violation of security protocol. I wonder how that'll look in court." She opened her mouth, searching for a retort, but came up empty. "I'm not pressing charges," he said after a moment. "Not yet. But I suggest you stop escalating. You don't know what kind of leverage you're poking at." Her expression shifted. "You think owning a few shares in the building makes you untouchable?" "Oh, Karen," Dylan said, stepping closer. "You're still not getting it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. On the screen was a paused video security footage from a hidden rooftop camera she hadn't noticed. It captured every second of her unauthorized visit. "I don't own a few shares," he said, eyes locked with hers. "I own the building, and starting tomorrow, I'm calling a meeting of my own." As he walked away, leaving her frozen under the rooftop lights, Karen finally understood. This wasn't about the pool anymore. This was about power, and she'd just lost hers. By the following week, Dylan had become the main character in a whisper war that infected every hallway, elevator ride, and laundry room conversation. Residents eyed him like he was radioactive, some with admiration, others with fear, and a few with blatant resentment. Karen's campaign wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was strategic, psychological. Every day brought a new HOA to stacked like dominoes beneath his door. Unapproved railing fixtures, noise complaints from rooftop parties, unauthorized appliance usage. It was absurd. He lived alone, had hosted no gatherings since the incident, and the unauthorized appliance was a portable ice maker he hadn't even unboxed yet. Still, the violations piled on like they were choreographed. He knew exactly what Karen was doing. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. She couldn't beat him legally, so she was trying to bury him in bureaucracy, hoping to break him before he broke her. Milo swung by that afternoon with a tool belt and a grin. "Brought the toy?" he said, hoisting a sleek black case onto the counter. Inside was a portable scanner, signal analyzer, and 2 hard drives. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "You're serious about this? You said to watch everything." "So I've been watching." He plugged in the drive and tapped on Dylan's laptop. "You've been targeted by over 12 different complaints, all submitted by the same 5 units. Know what else they have in common?" He clicked a folder open. Surveillance screenshots from the hallway security cams. Flicked across the screen. Timestamped. Clearfaces.Karen. And the residents of units 3B, 2F, 6D, and 5A. "Her little inner circle," Dylan muttered. Milo nodded. "They're all tied to her somehow. 2 of them were at her last birthday dinner. I cross-checked their voting records from the last HOA board elections. Every one of them voted her in by proxy." Dylan leaned back in his chair, processing it all. "She's stacking the board." "Yep, she's not just trying to take you down. She's trying to take over." Later that evening, Dylan called an impromptu elevator chat with a few neutral residents, longtime owners who kept to themselves and hadn't yet been pulled into Karen's influence. "I need your help," he said quietly, "and before you say no, hear me out." He showed them the security footage, the paper trail, and the disproportionate flood of violations he'd been hit with. He even pulled out the deed documents and the LLC portfolio proof that he wasn't bluffing about his stake in the building. "You don't need to fight my battles," Dylan said. "You just need to be aware of who's rewriting the rules behind your backs." One man, grizzled and quiet from Unit 8E, nodded slowly. "She tried to fine me for having an indoor plant too close to the window," he muttered. "Claimed it was a visual risk." Another woman chimed in. "She told me I couldn't use wind chimes. Said they were offensive to some religious beliefs." Dylan looked around. He saw something shift in their faces. Doubt cracking, confidence building. Karen's iron grip was weakening. The next morning, he sent a formal letter to the HOA board requesting an emergency vote for restructuring due to conflict of interest, bias, and procedural misconduct. Per the bylaws, he needed signatures from at least 25% of the owners to initiate the vote. By noon, he had 42%, by evening 61%. That night, Karen burst into the rooftop like a storm, breathless and furious, waving a stack of counter petitions. "You'd think you've won," she hissed, shoving papers toward him. "This building doesn't belong to you." Dylan stepped aside, letting her stomp past him toward the pool, where a group of residents were gathered. laughing and sipping drinks as once quiet allies, now openly defiant of her rule. He smiled faintly. That's the thing, Karen, it never really belonged to you either. As she turned to scream back at him, her heel caught the corner of the filter housing. She stumbled, arms flailing this time. No one rushed to help. She landed with a splash in the very pool she tried to destroy. The rooftop went dead silent. Then applause. Karen didn't show her face for 3 days. Her usual rounds, morning patrols with a clipboard, midday check-ins with the concierge, evening snooping in the courtyard vent, no lectures in the lobby, no passive-aggressive emails, just silence. It was unnerving, but Dylan knew better. She wasn't done. She was regrouping. In her absence, the building's atmosphere shifted. Residents smiled more, spoke louder, relaxed, on their balconies without fearing a fine for noise, shade, or visual clutter. It felt, for the first time in years, like people were living freely. But Dylan kept his guard up. He spent those days consolidating his position. Milo helped him draft a digital notice titled Open Forum Proposal Community Governance Overhaul. It outlined fairer rules, a rotational board based on peer voting, and, most importantly, an audit of the last 5 years of HOA funds. He hit send. Within an hour, half the building had RSVP'd to the upcoming vote. Later that night, just past 2 a.m., Dylan's phone vibrated. Not a call, an alert. Unauthorized attempt to access rooftop security node. He pulled up the camera feed. Static, then black. Milo, he said into the phone. She's moving. By sunrise, new notices were taped to every door. They were printed in bold, red block letters. Rooftop closed until further notice. Emergency safety concerns. Under investigation, HOA enforcement in progress. No signature. But everyone knew whose voice was behind the ink. Dylan stormed into the management office only to find the front desk clerk rattled and sweating. She came in here before I opened, he stammered. Said she was exercising emergency authority. Said you'd been cited by the fire department. What fire department? I don't know, the clerk admitted. She had a clipboard. Dylan turned away in disgust. Downstairs in the underground garage, he found Milo crouched beside a breaker box. She's bypassed the camera feed, Milo muttered, or got someone who knows how. Either way, she's scrubbing something. Dylan's eyes narrowed. She's going to sabotage. At the pool, the equipment, something to make it look dangerous. Give her a reason to call in the city. That evening, the building buzzed with whispered rumors. Some claimed the pool was leaking into the wiring system. Others heard that inspectors were coming to shut down the entire rooftop due to illegal installations. Karen hadn't been seen, but her voice spread like wildfire, and then Dylan got the text from a blocked number. Hope you've enjoyed your last swim. The roof's coming down. He stared at the message, heat crawling up the back of his neck. His fingers flew across the screen as he called Milo. Shut off the pump system. Now already did, but you're gonna want to see this. Dylan met him in the maintenance corridor beside the rooftop elevator shaft. Milo was crouched beside a pipe junction that had been tampered with. The bolts were loosened. A slow, deliberate leak dripped onto the wiring conduit. Another few hours, and this would have sparked, Milo said grimly, could have caused a rooftop fire, or worse. She wanted it to look like the pool was dangerous, Dylan said. She was trying to manufacture a disaster. He took photos, sealed the evidence, and forwarded it to his lawyer. The next morning, Dylan called a full building meeting. Not a board meeting, a resident assembly. People crowded the lobby, stairwells, even leaned over the mezzanine railing to hear. He projected the images onto the wall. Someone tried to make it look like my rooftop pool is a threat, but this wasn't neglect. This was sabotage. Sabotage. That could have injured or killed residents. And it's time you all know who's behind it. Gasps filled the room as he played a grainy security video from a secondary angle, the emergency generator camera. It clearly showed Karen crouched over the pipe junction, flashlight between her teeth, twisting a wrench. She'd tried to erase the footage, but Dylan had backups of the backups. He turned to the crowd. We're not just voting to remove Karen from the HOA board anymore. We're voting to press criminal charges. For the first time, no one looked scared of her, only furious. Karen resurfaced just before dawn. She marched into the building like a politician on damage control. Sunglasses on despite the lack of sun, flanked by 2 lawyers in suits far too expensive for HOA work. One carried a briefcase, the other carried a face of forced calm, the kind people wear when they know they're about to lose. Dylan was waiting for them in the lobby. No words, just a long, deliberate stare. She walked right past him like he didn't exist. But everyone else saw. The concierge, froze a woman from 3A, holding her dog, watched with narrowed eyes. Even Mr. Beckman from 8F, who hadn't spoken aloud in 3 years, muttered about time. Under his breath, the building wasn't hers anymore. That spell was broken. By mid-morning, the resident vote was in 0.92% in favor of dissolving the current HOA board, 96% in favor of banning Karen from holding any board position for life, 88% in favor of pressing charges. She tried to halt the vote, claimed it was invalid, tried to trigger an emergency injunction, but the building's legal oversight firm hired before Dylan ever moved in had already reviewed the footage, the leaks in the building bylaws. She had no authority left. A notice was quietly slipped under every door that evening. As of today, Karen Whitmore has been removed from all positions of power and is under legal investigation for willful sabotage and endangerment. A temporary community board will be formed to restructure governance, effective immediately. But Dylan wasn't celebrating, not yet, because as satisfying as it was to watch Karen's empire crumble, he knew her well enough to understand one thing: cornered people are dangerous. He instructed Milo to install new security locks on the rooftop entrance, had the server room password changed, activated backup surveillance nodes. For good measure, he had a locksmith swap the main boardrooms. Cylinder lock entirely. No mistakes, just in case. That night, he sat alone at the rooftop pool, staring out over the skyline. The water reflected the stars like shattered glass. His victory was nearly complete, but unease lingered. Beneath the surface, he didn't hear the rooftop door open, didn't realize someone else was there until a shadow fell over the pool's edge. "You really think this is over?" Karen's voice was low, but sharp. Her sunglasses were gone, her hair pulled back. No lawyers, no clipboard, just her hand, a look in her eyes. That was no longer about rules. "I have nothing to lose now," she said quietly. "Do you understand?" That Dylan didn't flinch. "Actually, you have everything to lose. You just never realized none of it was yours to begin with." She stepped closer. The water glowed between them, blue and silent. "I made this building. I gave it order. Without me, it'll collapse." "No," Dylan said. "Without you, it'll finally breathe." She pulled something from her pocket, a flash drive, tossed it into the pool. Dylan's eyes widened for a second, not because of the drive, but what it might have contained. "Backups," she said with a smile. "Insurance. You weren't the only one recording things." He stood, calm but alert. "I already have every file I need. That drive won't save you." "Maybe not," she said, "but you'd be surprised what secrets get revealed when people start digging. Yours included." And with that, she turned and disappeared into the stairwell. Dylan stared at the still rippling surface. It had looked like a checkmate, but maybe, just maybe, Karen still had one last move. Dylan barely slept that night. The flash drive haunted him, not because he feared what was on it, but because Karen believed it could hurt him. That meant she thought she knew something. And people like Karen didn't bluff, unless they were already desperate. That desperation, Dylan had learned, was where real chaos lived. By morning, he had Milo diving in the pool with goggles and gloves, sweeping the drain area for the drive. It had sunk to the bottom near the main intake grate, wedged against a grate fin like it was waiting to be noticed. By noon, it was on his laptop, encrypted. Naturally. "I can crack this," Milo said, studying the screen. "But whatever's on it, she wanted you to see it after she was gone. That means it's either useless or devastating. I can't afford either right now," Dylan muttered. Word of Karen's exit spread like wildfire. Some said she'd already left the state. Others swore they saw her with packed bags and a U-Haul at dawn. A few claimed she'd been escorted out by police, though that part was mostly wishful thinking. Still, no one had seen her since the confrontation. Her condo, empty. Her mail slot, stuffed. Her car, gone, but the damage, still active. That afternoon, Dylan received a letter from the Department of Urban Planning and Development. It was real, official, stamped. Subject: structural viability audit of rooftop load enhancements. He read the paragraph twice. Karen had filed a complaint with the city before her fall from grace, citing falsified permits and potential fraud relating to the rooftop pool. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a bomb with a delayed fuse. Dylan swore under his breath. Filed every permit legally, got every inspection. How the hell? Milo leaned over his shoulder. What if she submitted something forged, something that makes it look like you lied? The pool, the rooftop rights, the development company. Dylan quietly bought into. If Karen somehow created or found a document that appeared doctored, the city wouldn't just fine him, they'd freeze the whole property under review. Dylan made a call, then 3 more. By evening, a private legal consultant specializing in property fraud was reviewing every document from the original build. "She's playing the long game," Dylan said. She knew she couldn't win the vote, couldn't keep the board, so she left a trail of landmines. That night, alone in the penthouse, Dylan stared out at the dark pool. He hadn't turned on the lights. The water looked like oil under the moonlight, hiding things beneath. A ding from his computer pulled him back. Milo had cracked the flash drive. There were 3 files. One was a video, grainy and muted. Security footage from 6 years ago. Dylan leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. The angle was from an old construction site, and the man in the frame, him, much younger, hair longer, arguing with someone, one of the original building investors, then pushing. Then walking away. The other man didn't follow. Dylan's stomach dropped. He didn't remember this. Not like that. But the angle, the framing, it looked damning. It looked like more than a disagreement. It looked like a threat. He clicked the second file. A typed document, contingency for reversal of board authority. Dylan Mercer's concealed. Conflict of interest in development company acquisition. Karen had done her homework. The third file. An audio recording. Her voice. If you're hearing this, then I'm either in handcuffs or far away. But trust me, Dylan, you're not the only one who kept secrets. You buried yours in stone. I buried mine in the foundation. Let's see whose cracks first. Dylan sat back, pulse pounding. It wasn't just about the rooftop pool anymore. It never was. It was about the whole building. And now, someone else might come digging. Dylan had always built quietly, buying, restructuring, moving through corporate loopholes like smoke through cracks. But now, he felt the walls tightening. Karen had lit the fuse and vanished, but the fire was just starting to spread. The morning after the audio message, a second city letter arrived, this one marked urgent. The Department of Structural Enforcement had opened an investigation, not just into the rooftop pool, but the entire building's original development agreements, and it wasn't a review, it was a full audit. A worst-case scenario. Dylan barely had time to react when his phone buzzed again. Milo, they just showed up, Milo said. For guys in reflective vests. One's got a badge. They're combing through the mechanical room already. Dylan didn't answer. He was staring at the paused frame of the old video on his screen, the one Karen had left. On the flash drive, the camera made it look like he'd shoved an investor off-screen during a fight. He hadn't, had he? He remembered that day. Barely. A shouting match over permits and payments. But after that, he thought they just split. No reports. No incident. But Karen had taken this ancient footage, cut out the sound, and dropped it. In like poison. And it worked. When Dylan finally arrived in the lobby, the tension was visible. Residents gave him wary looks. The pool was closed again, this time not by HOA drama, but by a city seal chained across the rooftop access. Someone had posted a screenshot of the paused footage to the community message board. Is this who we trust to own our building? No name, no source, but clearly, Karen's doing. That night, Dylan sat in the boardroom, his now, technically, but the silence felt heavy. Everything he'd built was slipping out from under him. If the audit revealed even one inconsistency, the city could revoke permits, invalidate usage rights, even seize portions of the structure for inspection. And if they did, the residents would turn on him, fast. His phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. Hello. The voice was low, male, flat. You don't know me, but I knew Nolan Cray. Dylan froze. Cray. That was the developer from the video. The man he'd argued with. The one who vanished from the project right after that footage was filmed. He was my brother. And whatever happened back then, I want answers. Dylan swallowed. Look, it's not what it looks like. That footage came from a woman named Karen Whitmore. 2 years ago. Dylan's blood chilled. She's had it for 2 years. She reached out, told me you buried a lot more than permits, that the rooftop pool is built over something illegal. Or maybe someone. It hit him then. Karen hadn't just aimed to destroy his reputation, she had weaponized Nolan's disappearance. The guilt hit like a wave. Not because Dylan had killed anyone, he knew that much, but because he hadn't asked where Nolan went. After that fight, hadn't followed up, hadn't cared. Not then. And now. That apathy was being used to paint him as a villain. I didn't hurt your brother, Dylan said quietly. We fought. He stormed off. That was the end. Maybe. The line went dead. Dylan sat alone in the dim room, the city lights flickering against the boardroom glass. He had all the power, but it wasn't saving him. Now, because Karen hadn't tried to beat him in court, she'd turned him into a question. Doubt. A ghost story. And now, the whole building was starting to wonder if the man who built the rooftop kingdom had buried a body beneath it. The city's forensic team arrived at dawn, their vans parked like vultures outside the building entrance. Yellow tape cordoned off the rooftop, and residents huddled behind windows and doorways, murmuring as uniformed officials moved silently through the halls. Dylan stood by his window, staring down at them. The weight in his chest was unbearable, not because he was guilty, but because they believed he might be. And in a world driven by optics and speculation, belief could be a sentence all its own. The rooftop pool was drained by noon. Water poured down the maintenance chute in controlled torrents, revealing the tiled floor beneath Glynn, intact. Innocent. Then the jackhammer started. Beneath the pool structure was a sealed expansion cavity, of space left during initial construction, meant for future storage or equipment housing. Dylan had never touched it, never needed to, but now, that cavity had become a grave in the public mind. He watched them pry it open like a coffin. 1 hour passed, then 2, and finally a shout. A small, rusted lockbox was pulled from the concrete void. The city inspector handled it like evidence. Camera zoomed. Whispers rose. Some residents gasped from the balconies above. Dylan didn't move. When the box was opened, silence fell. Inside were 2 items. An old ledger, a microcassette recorder. The ledger was filled with notes in Nolan Cray's handwriting. Expenses, land disputes, payments, page after page until the final entry. Dated just 1 day after his last recorded argument with Dylan. I've moved the second set of books off-site. Can't risk Mercer seeing them. If the city ever finds out what we did with the permits, it's over. The confession wasn't Dylan's. It was Nolan's. He'd been forging documents before Dylan ever stepped in. The rooftop rights had been sold twice. Inspection results had been copied from a neighboring project. It was fraud, but it was Nolan's fraud. The microcassette added the final blow. A crackling, time-worn voice. If you're hearing this, Mercer, I lost. Yeah, you were right to yell at me, but you weren't ready to see what I buried. I've left enough trails. Maybe someone else will figure it out someday. Or maybe this place will finally eat itself like the rest of this city. By sunset, the narrative had shifted. Dylan wasn't the villain anymore. He was the last man standing in a ghost town of corporate greed. The city issued an official statement. The next day, the investigation has found no criminal wrongdoing by Dylan Mercer. The structural integrity of the rooftop pool is intact. The development fraud discovered predated his ownership and was committed by former partner Nolan Cray, now declared legally missing. The red tape was lifted. The rooftop reopened, the pool refilled. Karen, wherever she was, never saw the ending she'd planned, but Dylan didn't celebrate. He stood alone on the rooftop that night, a whiskey in hand, watching the water shimmer. Beneath the moonlight, he remembered Nolan's voice on the tape. Maybe this place will eat itself. Not this place, Dylan thought. Not anymore. In the weeks that followed, the building changed. A new resident-led board was formed, true volunteers this time. Transparent budgets, fair policies. Even Karen's former inner circle faded into the background, too embarrassed to reappear. But one thing remained untouched. The lockbox, now sealed in glass in the lobby. A quiet warning, and a reminder that power built on silence will always crack. And secrets, like water, rise to the surface. Dylan dipped his toes in the pool one last time, that summer night, smiled, and whispered to himself, "Next time someone tries to bury me, they better dig deeper." The end.